Hey, welcome back. And if this is your first time with us this morning, welcome. It is so good to have you with us. You're joining us at one of our favorite times of the year, the last part of this series that we call Be Rich. So I want to make sure if this is your first time that you go back and check out our first 2 weeks of Be Rich as we are joining together with literally thousands of people across the world to make a big difference, giving, serving, and loving together. That's what it means to be rich. We're doing that here in Kankakee County together with our Be Rich partners, Harbor House of Kankakee County and Blessings in a Backpack. And we've been making a difference, and we can't wait to celebrate next week what you are doing to help fan the flame in these great organizations. Now, if you haven't had a chance to give, you still can. You can do that today by downloading the GatheringPoint app and just clicking on the word give at the bottom and follow the instructions to be rich. There is still time to do that and to be a part of what is happening here through Be Rich. We can't wait to tell you about the impact that your giving is going to have. Today, Pastor Paul is going to close out our Be Rich series as we look at what it means to love.
In the darkness, I called your name. Into darkness, your mercy came. You called me out, you lifted me up. How great is your love? You bore
I love Be Rich. And I think one of the biggest reasons I love Be Rich is because I need Be Rich. Because here's what I found out about myself, and I'm sure it's probably true about you too. I default towards certain things, especially during this pandemic. I mean, we can default towards complaining. We can default towards knowing what's right. We can default towards opinionating about everything. But the Apostle Paul stops us and he commands us, and he tells his protege Timothy, he says, when you get around people that have more than they need, the definition for that is rich people. When you get around people that have more time than they need and more money and resources than they need, and they just have all of these things, you need to command them because they're not going to default themselves in this direction. It's just, you need to give and you need to serve and you need to love because people just don't default towards giving. We don't default towards generosity, do we? That's not our default. We don't default towards serving and go, man, let's see, what have I done today? I've done this today. Oh, I still need to serve. And we certainly don't default towards just loving one another and looking for our neighbors and all those kinds of things. So the Apostle Paul looks at Timothy and he says, look. You need to command them because they're not going to default towards these things. And you need to command them to give and to serve and to love. And so we're going to continue on this today because I love listening to the stories. I love listening to your stories about how this impacts you, and ultimately it grows your faith and it impacts the way that you have a relationship with God. And so today we're going to continue in this series of Be Rich. And in the gospel, twice, Jesus is amazed. And he's amazed 2 times. One, he is amazed. It's the only time Jesus is ever amazed by anything. He's amazed by people's great faith, and he's amazed by people's lack of faith. So this is a really big deal that we're going to begin to talk about this because our faith grows and it expands when we go through crisis. We have moments of uncertainty. Faith doesn't really grow when it's 72 degrees outside, there's no wind, and your bank account has extra, right? And your pantry's full of food. That's not really the places that our faith grows. And I hate to say that because I wish it did. I wish when things were going great, our faith would just soar. But it doesn't. And it really never has. And when we open up and we look at the great faith of the people in the New Testament and the Old Testament, we kind of look at these great pillars of the Bible, and we can begin to go through this. Hebrews 11 has a list of people, and it talks about their faith and the crises that they were going through, the uncertainty they were going through, the insecurities they were dealing with, and the unknowns, and I don't know if we will. And it talks about this. And the writer of Hebrews is so articulate when he says, and in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, it starts out and it says, by faith, Abraham. By faith, Abraham, he obeyed. And then it goes on, and then it tells him, then he and his son, and then it goes on, it says, by faith, Isaac. By faith, Abraham received the power of procreation, where he was barren and he couldn't have, and then he has this, and Abraham had faith, and he received the promise of this. And then it continues to go on, it says, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, in verse 21, he blessed each of his sons of Joseph, bowing before them. By faith, Joseph again. We get down to verse 23. By faith, Moses. Moses is born in a time of crisis. Pharaoh was killing all the baby boys, and by faith, Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after his birth, and we begin to see how that crisis moment created that. And then we have by faith. The people passed through the Red Sea when there was an enemy trying to kill them and attack them. By faith, the walls of Jericho, verse 30, come crashing down. By faith, Rahab, who is a prostitute, she didn't die because of those who were disobedient. Then it goes on and gives us a list in verse 32. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, all by faith. And you kind of read down these, and all of them had extreme situations, extreme circumstances where they had opportunity to complain, where they felt like they should give up, where they probably should have quit, where they should have given up. They were facing mocking, verse 36, flogging, chains, imprisonment. Some were dying, some were all of these things. Then verse 39, yet all of these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. It's kind of incredible. Yet over the last few months, I've heard many of your stories. I've listened to them, I've read the emails, I've listened to you in person, and some of you have had these stories that have really just sort of shaken up your faith. Many of you have talked about the struggle of faith, and And some of that is in regards to you haven't been able to gather here in this room at the church. Others of you have had other reasons why you've just said this isn't, and there's just been this struggle. Many of you in these moments of struggle have turned to God and your faith has grown. And others of you have a little different path, and you've been dealing with tremendous fear and uncertainty. And you want to step out on faith, but you're afraid. You want to trust God, but you just haven't. And I've been listening to so many of these stories, and I've been trying to figure out what are like the similarities between these stories. What are the things that have caused some people to grow in their faith and other people to kind of shrink back and become timid and look to other people and point and make excuses and all these kinds of things. And what's interesting when you look back at it, and one thing that I've noticed for sure is simply this, and I think it's true with what Hebrews is saying as well. Big life moments shape your faith, positively or negatively. They're going to shape your faith. And I know some of you have prayed, oh God, help me. And if you do, then I will. And you've tried to like negotiate with God and all these kinds of things. And then there's some of you that you just decided in that moment to trust God. But then others of you, I've been watching, and the things, these are just the ones that I know of. But some of you, you got in an accident. There was an accident, and since that accident, some of you have gotten sick. Some of you have been sick with COVID. Some of you have been dealing in this time with someone who's passed away, and that's been a challenge for those. Some of you have gotten a divorce. Some of your parents have gotten a divorce through this season. There's been tragedy. One person shared, and then I woke up and I found myself behind bars. Some of you, then I got caught. I was let go at work and I had nowhere to turn. Somebody else, then we moved here and I didn't know anyone and I couldn't connect with anyone because we were all quarantined and all this sort of stuff. Some of you then got a new job. Some of you have lost a job. Some of you finished school or graduated during that. Some of you have started school in a pandemic. Some of you got married and that was a struggle trying to get to that moment. Some of you had a baby or having a baby. Some of you just found out that you're going to be grandparents. And these are all big moments. And they're moments where we do one of two things, really. One, we either draw close to God or we push away from God. And we found some consistencies. I found some consistencies in this, and I began to look at people's lives when their faith begins to grow. And many of you have had these big moments where God has begun to go, and it's been a wake-up call for both positive and negative for this. And you knew this was going to be a moment where you were going to have to go deeper into your faith. And now there's other moments I'm sure that came along too, but one of the things that's consistent with these is a lot of times people will come alongside of you. And you'll say, I made it through and my faith grew because someone came along and it was because of them and they prayed with me and they cared for me and their faith began to shape your faith and your faith grew. And I've heard you say, I started talking to, and you'll tell me their name, and you know what they did? They prayed with me. And they became a friend when I really didn't have a friend and I needed a friend, or they invited me to a small group, or they invited me to join on this Zoom, and I didn't know anybody there. And I was so nervous. Or they'll say, my neighbor, my coworker, my family member, just when I needed someone to point me to refocus and recenter my relationship on Christ, this person kind of guided me towards Jesus. And now you look back at that time and you go, you know what? I think God put that person in my life. It's almost like God put that neighbor next to me. It's almost like God put that person at work, or when I was having that conversation, when I was on my walk, or all these kinds of things. And it was like a godly person reached out to you and something happened and you go, I didn't even realize it was going to happen, but in that moment my faith grew. Others of you talked about, like, during this pandemic, I started reading my Bible. I'd never really done that before. Or I started being consistent. I started reading a proverb a day. Or I started, signing up for a Bible app version, one of these. And it just, all of a sudden, for the first time, it just started to make sense. Some of you, for the first time, have taken time to pray. And I mean, like, really pray. Not like just, God, thanks for the Cheerios and, whatever kind of prayer you pray like that. But you really started to just go, God, I'm going to spend some time with you in prayer, meaningful prayer. God, what direction should I take in my life right now? How should I handle this particular situation that I'm faced with? And then you talk about it and you say, you know what happened is I didn't realize it in the moment, but my faith grew. Then others of you had started talking about, and then I started serving, or then I decided to give. I mean, that's what this whole series has been about. And we need to be reminded. I'm so glad the Apostle Paul said, you know, I got some suggestions for you. No, he said, command people. Command them to serve, to give, to love your neighbors. And this is a powerful, powerful way that God uses to grow my faith, and He uses it to grow your faith. And whenever we talk about serving or giving or loving, I'll be honest, there's always a fear, isn't there? I mean, there is. There's just a fear. Because whenever we try to take a step in our faith, there's always going to be an excuse. And just this past month again, I heard somebody again say they were scared to give to others because they were looking at their own resources and they always feel like they're being short and they just don't have that, especially in a pandemic. And then once again, it happened again, and they said, but I decided to try it. I decided to give $39.95 for others. And God showed up in the process. We hear the same story with people through serving. They'll go, you know, I was so scared to sign up. I didn't know what it was going to be like. I didn't know when to volunteer. Somebody asked me if I'd help out with middle schoolers on Monday or Wednesday night, and honestly, I don't really know enough about the Bible to explain that to them. And I was so nervous, and then I showed up, and because I was thinking, what if they ask me a question I don't even know? I don't even know it. And they said, but I stepped out on faith, and man, I started studying for the lesson, and my faith grew. We have people say, I helped assign at Night to Shine, or I did a Gathering Point of service, and I was so nervous, I was so outside my comfort zone. And then without exception, people will come back and say, but you know what? God did something in me. And when I stepped out of my comfort zone and trusted God, He met me. And I was so scared, but something happened, and I came back from that experience different. Why? Why does that happen? How does that happen? Here's why I think. Because when we're confronted with our vulnerabilities and with our weaknesses, and we present those vulnerabilities and our fears, and we present them to God, God shines. That's His moment. And our faith grows. If we live our whole life and say, yeah, I'm a Christian, and you know, I do all this, but we never step out, you know what happens? And I see this happen too all the time. Our faith grows boring because we've never tested it. Our faith becomes irrelevant. And we just sort of put it on the shelf because there's no vibrancy. And some of you right now are finding yourselves in some vulnerable situations right now, aren't you? And you're going, you know, I could never do some of the things that they're doing in Hebrews chapter 11. I mean, it's filled with all these great people of faith. But here's what you need to know. They weren't great people of faith in the moment. They just decided to step out. And we remember them as people of great faith because of the action that they took and they stepped out. And so it's a list of imperfect, like vulnerable people. With each phrase, it says they stepped out, what? By faith, by faith, by faith, by faith. So here's what I want you to do. Here's what I want you to do. For some of you, I need you to find a person where you can just make some meaningful interaction with them in their life. Where you find a relationship in your life where you just have the opportunity to just point them to Jesus. And you've already given, and some of you have served, and this week we want you to love, and this is why. Because when you become vulnerable to your Heavenly Father and say, I'll go love, it not only grows your faith, which you need to do, but it also steps out and encourages the faith of someone else. And our faith in the process gets bigger and gets stronger, and all the time I hear, you know, how all of a sudden God showed up. Because we find ourselves in situations where we go, God, if you don't show up in this moment, I need you to come through for me. It's the same thing the disciples dealt with in Matthew chapter 14. They begin to go and we see a give, serve, love, and he goes, the disciples are going, Jesus, we can't give, serve, love. We don't even have any food. How are we going to do that? And in Matthew chapter 14, verse 17, they replied, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. They didn't have anything. They're like, we need to keep that for ourselves. Jesus says, we're going to give, we're going to serve, and in the process, we're going to love them. And they took the story and they begin to go, and then after that story, the miracle happened and everybody had more than they needed. And immediately then it says, verse 22, the disciples get into the boat and they go ahead to the other side. Well, you just missed the crowds. And then we've talked about this. There's a sea that came, a great storm that comes up, and they couldn't even get across the lake. And immediately again, they're going, we can't figure this out and we can't do this on ourselves. And the reason that Jesus is doing this, and he shares this story, is because what he's trying to impart with them is Jesus' lesson is about faith. That when you give, and you serve, and you love, and when you put yourselves in situations that are bigger for you, too big for you to handle on your own, your faith grows. And that's what Be Rich is all about. We want to push you. The Apostle Paul says command. We just want to push you to do things that you don't feel adequate for, because when you step outside of your faith gets bigger. So this week, here's what we want you to do. I want you to get a note card and a gift card, and I want you to send it to some people who you just think need some encouragement. If you need some ideas, I think if you have a child that's in school, probably wouldn't hurt to send a note of encouragement to their teacher or a staff member. They just need encouragement. Maybe you need to find somebody in your neighborhood. Maybe there's somebody that you have found this week and you just looked at them. And maybe if you just pray for a minute and you go, God, is this it? And you just go, God, yeah. And God just kind of goes, yeah. Why don't you just send this person a note of encouragement and just love them? Because when you give and when you serve and when you love one another, not only is their faith impacted, but your faith is impacted as well. Can we do that this week? Can we be rich and generous in good deeds this week by loving one another through the gift of encouragement? Let me pray with you today. Father, today, we love Be Rich because these are things we just wouldn't default towards. And so would you help us this week to encourage the faith of others? And we know in turn, when we step out in situations that are uncomfortable and make us vulnerable, and we go, I don't think I could do that, or that's weird, or I don't know if I should, that you actually transform and encourage our faith in our heart, and it's a way that we love you by the way that we love one another. Thanks for helping us this week, God. We love you. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.